There we go.
Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know what happened. Maybe my phone was warm. I don't know. In the sun. Can be all
That's
kind of
possible.
things. Yeah. So we were talking about you moving to Korea and starting an ITF club and or trying to find a place to train ITF, and it was we were disconnected.
Yes. So I finally found a place in 2008 with Master Kim Hoon.
Yeah.
He was the Secretary General of ITF in Korea, one of the foremost people to promote ITF again in South Korea. He was a Taekwondo Korean Tigers. I don't know if you're familiar with them. The Korean Tigers is the national demonstration team.
Yeah.
Member, and he was the captain for this demonstration team for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Somehow he found out the real history of Taekwondo, and he connected with Grandmaster Park Jong-soo in Canada, and then he went and trained there, met Grandmaster General Che Hong-hee, and also trained in Japan because it's closer. And he was one of the first people to reintroduce ITF in Korea. So I met him in 2008, started training with him. I was a third degree, ITF third degree at the time. I graded for fourth degree under him. And later with Grandmaster Park Jong-soo to fifth degree, also under Master Kim Hoon. And about 3 years ago, he decided that he's tired. He's been doing running martial art gyms for a very long time. He wanted to take a break and he wanted to travel the world. So that was his plan. So he closed his gym, and it's the gym that you attended, that you visited us at.
Yeah.
So when were you in Korea?
I think it's 4 years this fall, because my son was 7 at the time. It was in October, and we were in Seoul on his birthday, the 3rd of October, 2nd of October, and he was 7, and now he's going to be 11. So it's 3.5 years ago.
Okay, so maybe shortly after you left, he made this announcement. It was the following year. And so at that time, I was fully running the ITF section of his gym. So he had a gym that taught many different things: ITF Taekwondo, Muay Thai, grappling. There was some fitness programs happening, a Pilates section, and so on. And so I was the main instructor for ITF Taekwondo. And so I had some students under me, and some of them were preparing for black belt as well. And so I decided, well, okay, then I will open my own place with his help, which I did. And I opened a gym in the Itaewon area. Itaewon is the foreigner area in Seoul. And I had the gym. It was very quaint, very small. It was on a rooftop. So there's the small room and this rooftop, and it was very interesting to train outside. Very, I would say, almost romantic, very sentimental. The type of training you see in Hong Kong long ago, people training on the rooftop.
Yeah, I was thinking Wing Chun Ip Man when you said it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly that type of feeling.
Yeah.
It was really cool. I loved it, but it was also very impractical because Korea is a country with extreme weathers. The winter, it's snowy, very cold, icy rooftops, which makes it dangerous. And in the summer, we have monsoon season, torrential rains, which also make training difficult. And then in the fall and spring seasons, there are a few weeks where the air quality is horrendous. Some dust blows over from the Gobi Desert, from China. It has micro dust particles that can clog your lungs. It's really dangerous. And also these dust cloud moved through industrial areas. So the toxins from the industry stick to this dust. So it's not good to be outside. So in the end, we didn't train that much outside. We had to train inside in this little room that I had. And the room was very small. So it was too small to do a pattern in, for instance, especially if there are a couple of us. So it ended up being quite impractical. And after a year, I had to renew the contract or not. And the people below us started to complain about the noise. And that was the real reason I closed it. I could still endure the weather, but enduring the downstairs neighbors who were complaining was the reason I decided to close the dojo. And then I started to search for a new space. So I've been searching for a new space now for 2 years. I've had some successes that turned into failures. One of the main things is property in Seoul is ridiculously expensive. And in other countries, if you were to rent a space, you have to pay like a key money deposit for maybe the equivalent of 1 or 2 months rent. So let's say your rent is $1,000 a month, then you should give a $2,000 deposit. In Korea, you give 10 months to a year's deposit.
Wow.
So that means if I'm going to find a place where the rent is $1,000, I should put down a $10,000 deposit. You get the deposit back eventually, but that gives you an idea of how expensive it is. And I'm saying $1,000 because that is the average rent for a relatively, how can I say, a space that is big enough, just big enough, where we can do patterns in comfortably. So if
How about
I
the
were,
universities? Isn't there any place at the university during some student clubs or something like that?
So my university is not in central Seoul.
Okay.
It's quite on the periphery, on the eastern edge of Seoul. I can literally walk to the boundary of Seoul from where I live.
Yeah.
And most people that want to train ITF style are not local Koreans. Local Koreans are not particularly interested in Taekwondo. There are a few that want to train ITF because they've somehow heard about it. So most of my students are foreigners, and for them it would be really difficult to travel to where I live and work, to my university. So I'm searching for a place quite central, and I found a place.
I had a funny experience when I was in Seoul as well. With I was meeting my Hapkido instructor, and he brought one of his students, which I also met before, to help us with the English and with the language. And he was a history student. He studied Korean history. Yeah. And when we were driving around in Seoul and we passed all the statues of all the Korean heroes, I was pointing out them. Oh, that's Yisun Sin, and that's Seong, and that's Chonggun and An Chonggun, and that's this and that's. And I told him what I knew about them, and I wanted to have more information about these people. And he asked me, "Why do you know all this Korean history?" Because in my Taekwondo we learn Korean history. You can call it Yoksa Taekwondo. And Yoksa Taekwondo, that's cool. So maybe you should call it Yoksa Taekwondo, and everybody just.
Yeah. I call it traditional Taekwondo.
Yeah.
Jontong Taekwondo. So when I advertise, I call it traditional Taekwondo to differentiate from the modern sport focused version of Taekwondo. So ironically, I found a place very nice. It even has a bathroom like that I can change into a shower room and the changing room and everything. And I was about to sign it when suddenly Corona became a serious thing. And my instructor, who, you know, he since I'm a foreigner, I need a Korean for the visa purposes for the yeah. So I need a Korean to be the official owner of the gym.
Yeah.
So Master Kim Hoon is willing to do that for me. But in any case, he said, you know, are you sure? He asked me because he was willing to sign it if I was willing to do it. But then I had to think, okay, so I will probably not have students for the next 6 months. Because at that time, the Korean government closed all dojang for training.
Yeah.
In the meantime, they've reopened again. But there was this period where the dojang were closed. And I realized, okay, so for the next 6 months or so, I will have to pay this $1,000 for my pocket. I won't be able to get enough students. Am I willing to do that sacrifice? And, you know, when you open a new gym, there's always a period where the instructor has to pocket the money himself. And I'm willing to do that. But it was just too much of a risk to start the gym. So I'm waiting again. It seems like gyms are back again, things are moving again, but now I have to find a new place. I have to continue my search to find a good dojo. So it's quite unfortunate.
Yeah. Because I know you have been having a lot of visitors, like myself and my family, and some guys from Finland. I know you've been having visits from, and you choose to be independent from all the international federations. So is this because? Yeah.
Yes. Sadly, as you know, there's so much politics, and visitors feel, how can I say? Sometimes visitors are told by their seniors that they are not allowed to visit certain ITF dojang because they are of a different affiliation.
Yeah.
And because of that, I decided, well, the purpose of my dojang is to create a space for foreigners to come to Seoul, to come to Korea and train in ITF Taekwondo in the birthplace of Korea. And I don't want politics to hinder that opportunity.
Yeah.
So I am on friendly basis with the ITF groups here in Korea. There are 3 groups. It's the Vienna group and the Canada group, and then there's ITF headquarters, which is a local group. So I'm on friendly basis with all of them. I am on friendly basis with other international organizations. So United Taekwondo, or UITF, has now merged with the ITF Spain. Is it now ITF Poland? With that group. So I have good connections with them. I am very friendly with Grandmaster Park Jong-soo because I did my 5th dan with him. So I try to be apolitical. And because I am connected with many of these groups, I can issue certificates through various channels depending on the student. Yeah. So if the student is likely to move to a country where a certain ITF is prominent, if it's in my ability, I try to issue a certificate that would be the least profitable for him or her going back to where they come from.
Cool. It's not easy, huh?
No, it's not. It's difficult. And another thing is, I try to create an authentic, what I refer to as Korean body culture. So I'm doing my own research about what is real Korean body culture. And if you connect yourself with a specific ITF body, they might impose a particular syllabus and specific stylistic requirements.
Yeah.
I try to be not stylistically fixed. Rather, I train in different Korean martial arts and other traditional Korean activities like traditional Korean dance, Korean drumming, and so on, to better understand what is traditional Korean body movement. We have to differentiate. Is it modern Korean body movement, which we see in K-pop music and, that type of urban dancing associated with that. So that's something completely different. When we talk about body culture, I'm referring to a traditional Korean body culture, which we can see characteristics that are shared by ITF Taekwondo, Taekyon, Korean dance, and some other traditional movements.
I remember when we were visiting you, we went through a sequence where you mixed in some Taekyon shifting of movement and straight into the basic patterns of ITF.
Yes, so I recall that exercise. So in that exercise, I tried to show the 3-beat rhythm that is in the ITF patterns, but there's a similar rhythm in Taekyon. So we were doing kind of this foot shifting movement. And just since you were there, I was hoping to expose you to this idea of how the ITF 3-beat rhythm and the Taekyon 3-beat rhythm are similar. So I sometimes do that. Well, it depends on the visitors or my students what I want to focus on. But that's my mission, kind of, to introduce a Korean aesthetic, a traditional Korean way of moving, and to show how ITF Taekwondo has evolved from being a Japanese way of moving to a Korean way of moving.
Yeah. You also do Hapkido, and we both have some background in Hapkido. And how do you see the connection if you focus on the movement and the the sine wave, which many people dislike, and many people who haven't done it says, that's what happened. From my own experience, I use the sine wave a lot when I do Hapkido, and I see a lot of sine wave in Hapkido when I get it presented to me. Yeah,
I definitely agree. So ITF Taekwondo shares with Taekyon a particular rhythm, that's 3-beat rhythm. Hapkido doesn't have a rhythm. If you talk to some of the Hapkido masters, grandmasters, they would say that there's one rhythm. There's only one beat. You should do your movement in one beat. But that, how does that make sense? It's because in Hapkido they use the circle, the circle principle. So you complete your movement. You complete your movement within one circle. So that's the one beat.
The setup of the technique and the collapse.
Yes, exactly. So now the sine wave or the wave is just another manifestation of the circle. So sine wave is the circle plotted over a distance or over a time. So let's say you have a circle starting here. This is our base. You go down, up, and down again. And that is the same as what the sine wave is. Down, up, and down again. So it's the circle just stretched over a distance or plotted over time. And or another way to see it is it's a spiral.
Yes.
So in many of the sine wave movements have circular movements pulled over a distance. And that is what we do in Hapkido as well. It's not, well, often we describe it as a circular movement, and some techniques are indeed a circle, but it's often a spiral rather than a circle. So this is what ITF and Hapkido shares. They share this spiral principle, or the wave principle, the circle principle. It's all the same thing. It's just different ways, perspective on the same principle.
Yeah, and the body shift between on the weight shifts between left and right leg, how you twist and goes on to a top and collapse and into a point of impact when you set locks.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's
it's very much the same.
On the Radix idea.
A slight difference is that Hapkido doesn't focus that much on formalized stanzas.
No.
Whereas in ITF we have some stanzas, and I think the two merge very well.
Yeah.
There's something that the two styles bring together very nicely and very easily. They are not at loggerheads. They just flow into each other very comfortably.
Yeah, because the stances, it's my belief that the stance is never a stance. It's just a picture of the waterfall. So you just flow through it. So the stances are only there to picture where to do the impact in a pattern, for an example. But when you apply it, it just doesn't stop. It's just it's there and it's not there.
Yes, and that's something I think about. A misconception about the sine wave motion is this formalized idea of down, up, down.
Yeah.
And that is a wrong idea of thinking about it. It is not. A better translation would be wave principle rather than sine wave principle. Because when we use this term sine wave, we have codified the amount of oscillations there should be. Whereas the natural movement or real application of these techniques is not restricted. And it could be inverse. It could be up, down, up, or just up, down, or just down, up, or left and right. In practice, it is not so restricted. So I think people can benefit more from the sine wave when they don't restrict themselves to this formulaic down upon idea. I personally teach it more as a relax, rise, fall method. That's how I usually teach it. I have many other ways to articulate it. If I do a throwing technique, then it would be blend, uproot, and drop, for instance. So there are many different articulations of the same principle. It depends what you want to do.
Yeah, and it's very much if you've been training judo or any martial arts, grappling kind of martial arts, which is live with live opponents, you know that if you pull something down, he will pull the opposite way, and to pull someone, to pull him down to the ground, to make him root and then release him, he will go up, and then you go with the flow, right? And
yes,
or if
exactly.
you pull him one direction, or if you push him, he will come against you. So the interaction with the partner to understand how the sine wave can be applied in that interaction, that's the biggest lack for stand-up fighters which do patterns, which don't understand the grappling aspects of the patterns.
Yeah.
That's what I do a lot with the Radix seminars that I do, right? Because of course
Yeah.
I have my jiu-jitsu and hapkido background and judo, and with the resisting partners, so you get to work with that force on another level, that it's possible to
And
just
it's because of your experience in these resisting hands-on training that you grasp the principle of the sine wave, that it is not restricted to this idea of down, up, down. It is it's more about the oscillation and using you canceling your opponent's resistance or creating opportunities, or
yes.
you know, it's really a brilliant principle that is restricted by this word sine wave. And ideally, I think we should change the term, but it's so embedded, I don't think it will be changed. But if I could have my way, I would call it wave principle or circle principle, some other term that does not restrict the thinking so much. And when we do that, people will much easier see the correlation to other martial arts. They would much easily see, oh, this is in Aikido, or this is in Tai Chi Chuan, or this is in, Bakwazan, or, that so many other martial arts use the same principle or similar principle. But because people are so stuck on this term, sine wave, that they aren't able to see it. And also the detractors, the people that are so anti sine wave, I really believe it's because they don't understand it. They don't understand the core principle. They think it's the scientific idea that we have of using this thing called sine wave that you find in a science textbook. But it is not. And even if you look at the Korean encyclopedia, the term sine wave is not used in the encyclopedia. There's two different terms that are used. I don't know why General Che decided to make it sine wave in English. It's unfortunate.
I did a few years where I studied Hanmudo with Dr. Kim in the States, and he was talking about you know this more than me, but you know this Korean game where there's a plank where they stand one on each side and they jump. They jump up and down. It's a Korean folk activity.
Yeah, he almost like a trampoline.
Yeah, like a trampoline, but yeah, you know, I don't know what it's called in Korean either. You know?
No, I have it in the book somewhere.
Yeah,
I can probably look it up. I must have it here somewhere.
Yeah, but they use the same. They use much of the same principle when they stand on one side and one is jumping up, and when he lands, he makes a force and he makes the other one fly up, and the bigger plank, the higher they can go. So there's a timing there between the two guys on this plank, which you have to time it and jump at the same time that his weight is going, because then the plank will shoot up.
Yeah,
it's an interesting thing, because Dr. Kim said that it is a part of Korean body culture as well, because the shift of movement and the up and down and this body culture, as you call it.
Yeah, and of course we can just refer to it as yin yang.
Yeah,
most people know what yin yang is. In Korean, it's called yang. So yang is part of Korean body culture, and if you look at the Korean dance, there's constantly this interplay. Let's say if one hand turns this way, the other hand will turn upward, and they will shift like this. It's such a part of how they move, and creating counterbalances and using counterbalances for technical proficiency.
Yeah.
So it's not just there for the philosophical balance, they apply that idea of Yang to create technique, whether it's in the dance or in drumming or in the martial arts. It's part of the cosmology, of how things work. It's a scientific thinking. Of course, this is pre-modern Newtonian physics, but it's the same idea of force and counter force, reaction force, and so on.
It's a really interesting topic. I think it should be explored more, and to have the connection between, I like the Korean body culture, as you call it, and that what we actually do in the ITF patterns, and what actually happens when you are working with a partner, and to make it.
I'm slowly working on a book on this topic. First, a big thing was first to establish that this is in fact Korean body culture. And I've written an article, and it is being submitted with a book that will come out by UNESCO. Hopefully they accept my final chapter, and I need to submit it at the end of this month. And so that's the one thing, to establish, okay, so this is in fact a Korean way of moving, and ITF Taekwondo is moving in that Korean way. So this has been a very long time project of mine, and it's literally years of first watching, just trying to figure out what is it that Taekwon does that is the same as ITF, that is the same as traditional Korean dance, that is the same as drumming, that is even the same as shiram, the wrestling. What are the commonalities? Are there commonalities, or is it just my imagination? So it was first just watching, going to performances for years, and then joining in, like starting to learn the dances, starting to learn Taekwon and so on, and really analyzing it. So it has really taken me many years of investing and learning the vocabulary. That's the other big thing, is because these different activities use different terms. Sometimes they use the same term, but often they have different terms. In dance, there's a different term for up and down movement than in ITF Taekwondo. We call this sine wave. But in dance, they have ogumjil, for instance, which is the bending of the knee joint. And in Taekwon, there's maybe a different term, and so on. So it took me a long time to learn the vocabulary and to know how these different vocabularies correspond. In some cases, the same words are used, which is nice, it's useful. In other cases, it's not. In ITF Taekwondo, General Che tried to use more modern scientific words, which does not always correspond to the traditional words. For instance, he uses the term knee spring, the knee spring motion. So, okay, now I have to go search what is knee spring motion in Korean. That the way he describes it was the springing effect of the knee. But there is actually a Korean word for that, which is ogumjil. Ogumjil is the bending action of the inner joints. So your elbow can also have ogumjil, and the knee can have ogumjil, and the hip and so on. And so I had to learn the vocabulary and the movement vocabulary over a very long time before I could really write about it. Previously, I grasped it intuitively. I could see there's a connection, but I couldn't describe it because I just didn't have the words. That's the hard part, right?
In your mind, you can see it and you can feel it when you're working with a partner and you try to move and you try to set him up for something, and then you succeed, and wow, that was really a part of what I do in the patterns. And
Yeah.
but it's hard to describe. It's
Yes.
so hard to describe, especially if you want to be like at the university level.
Yeah, academically. So it took me
academically about it. Yeah.
over 11 years. So last year, November, I was invited to a academic conference focusing on Korean martial arts. And I presented my findings there in front of this, mostly Koreans. Many of them are Korean grandmasters. One of them is like a judo Olympian and so on. So I was really nervous, me as a foreigner coming there and telling them, this is how Koreans move.
I can only
imagine. That was basically my presentation. And it was very well received. So finally, I have the confidence after that conference to say, okay, I can now, with a degree of authority as a foreigner, speak about Korean body culture, Korean movement. But it was a long journey. That's over 10 years of thinking about it and writing about it. So I have my blog, and my blog is kind of like a brainstorming place where I write things, and many of the things I wrote 10 years ago are not, I don't believe them anymore. But it's the place where I've started to work out these ideas. For instance, long ago, I thought that the up and down movement that we have in ITF Taekwondo comes from Taekwon. And I disagree with that now. I think the up and down movement in Taekwon and in ITF Taekwondo and in Korean dance have the same source, which is Korean body culture.
I understand.
So things have changed. My ideas have changed. And the evidence that Taekwon had a strong influence on ITF Taekwondo is not there. So I had to rethink some of the things I had thought before. And as I come upon academic articles about the history of development of Taekwondo and so on, it was really necessary.
There is something that I want maybe your opinion on, because when I teach this, I'm going to tell you how I teach it, and I want to hear your opinion on it. Because I do some self-defense courses in Norway for the federation here, where they need to take this to go to third degree. And in this history section, I'm telling them that Taekwon was not a martial art. It was more like a folk. Like in Norway, we have some old folk dance where we kick, where we jump around and we kick the hat of a stick, which is not a competition, but it's more like you show what kind of man you are. And there is some fiddles and people dance around and they jump and they do that like a folk dance. And also we do arm wrestling. We do pull a hook and try to see who's stronger, and like party activities, right? And what I say is that Taekwon was not a system. It was more like a traditional folk dance where they try to see how high they can kick and how they move, and it was more like that. What is your opinion?
So I both agree and disagree with your statement. Taekwon was used as a folk game in the way you are describing it. But it's closer to the way we see wrestling in many societies.
Yes.
So it is combative in that sense. So it's not performative like a dance.
Okay.
Or just kicking an object, just showing your gymnastic ability. So it is not a performance in that sense, because there is touching an opponent and there are teams playing against each other and competing in a type of combative activity.
Isn't that a modern thing?
No,
The
no,
competitions?
no, because the way these competitions happened, it happened during village festivals.
Yeah.
So teams from different villages would come together and play this game, compete against each other.
Yeah.
And so a modern manifestation is individual people playing against each other.
Yeah. So it was formalized.
There were basic rules, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It looked quite different from what it looks today. For one thing, that the space on which they competed was much smaller.
Yeah.
It was maybe a 2 meter by 2 meter straw mat, which is quite small. Whereas today they compete in a much bigger space, I guess, to make it last a little bit longer, because if you have more space, you can strategize a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is, and then there are some historic references to Taekwon. One of them is interesting, where it mentions that somebody used Taekwon to hurt somebody else, or maybe even kill somebody else. So it's one small reference. We can't deduce too much from it, but clearly there was a sense that it had a lethal or a very a dangerous application.
Was it a pure striking art where did they grab each other?
So the goal of Taekwon is to topple your opponent, or to hit them in the head with a kick. So you win by either kicking somebody in the face or making them fall down. So in that sense,
so it was a lot of sweeps.
There's lots of sweeps and grabs, throwing techniques, and so on. So one way to sweep somebody is to push them and like sweep their leg from underneath them. So it's tactile. It's very hands-on. And for that reason also, you see that Taekwon and Shiram, which is the Korean wrestling style, have quite a number of shared techniques.
Is Shiram, which is Korean wrestling for the people watching, is that very similar to the Mongolian style of wrestling? Do you know any? It's the same.
Yes.
Is it the same history line there?
We are not exactly sure about the history line, but it's definitely closer to Mongolian wrestling than sumo in Japanese, because you start from a moment of very close proximity of touching rather than charging at each other. And you grab onto a waistband when you start.
So it's very similar to the Viking Glima system.
I won't say I'm expert on Viking wrestling, but yes, the little bit I've seen of it, yes, it looks very similar. There's a waistband and you grab onto it, and you just need to make your opponent fall. Speaking of Shiram is probably the oldest consecutive Korean martial art. There's questions about Taekwon, because Taekwon kind of disappeared for a few decades, and then it re-emerged again. So there's no clear sense of a continual training, and the same is true for all other Korean martial arts. Basically, all Korean martial arts as we know them today are rediscoveries and, to a degree, a reinvention. We don't actually know how much they connect with the ancient practices. Whereas Shiram is, because it's rather simple, it's wrestling. There are not that many techniques. You can go on to YouTube and watch all the Shiram techniques in less than half an hour. It's very simple. People do it often. Sometimes I go to the beach and I see these old harabuji, old grandfathers, just kind of challenging each other. Both of them are drunk from drinking too much soju, but they wrestle, and it's something that just survived like a dialect. It has always been there.
Yeah.
But it's not formal. It wasn't formalized in the past. Taekyon also, it wasn't a formal. There was no federation.
No.
Like with sumo. Sumo has this very long, very formal, ritualistic custodians that keep it. Whereas with Taekyon and sumo, there were no formal federations or so on. It was just something that people
do you know the term tegumi from Okinawa?
Yeah, the word te, yeah.
The tegumi, it's te like in karate, and tegumi is more like a hand swapping. It's like old traditional wrestling, which is on Okinawa. And when Funakoshi was going to give a name for the sparring in karate, he just swapped the character from tegumi to gumite.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So the kumite, which is sparring in karate, is the characters of te. Gumi is gumite. So it went from hand swapping to swapping hands. And the wrestling and the karate kumite was a little different, because in the kumite in the start you could not grab him. So it's more like the Taekwondo like we have today, with you cannot grab him. But now you can grab in karate. But at the start you could not do that. It was just the hands and feet. At a certain I don't know how many years it was, but it's interesting because in the karate history on Okinawa, it was only taught in people's home as a counter to the Okinawan wrestling. So a lot of the kata moves are counters to being grabbed, like Husinsu, right? So it's interesting to see
the big crossing for blocking and so on.
Yeah,
it's kind of to leap off the hands. Yeah.
But I wonder how similar the tegumi and the Syrium is, and also the Mongolian wrestling and all that kind of stuff. The old traditional folk wrestling styles. It would be interesting to.
I don't know, because the goal in Shilam is not necessarily to be distant from your opponent. They start from holding on.
Yeah.
But in Taekyon, for instance, one of the very first movements you learn is this kind of circling hands, waving hands motion, which is the main purpose is to prevent somebody from grabbing onto you. So in Taekyon, you definitely see many of these types of techniques where the goal is to prevent the opponent from touching you so that they can throw you. And Taekyon and Shilam will often train together or in the same area. So I see a kind of a parallel to what you are discussing.
Yeah. It's interesting to look at that. Because, So you also have the later in history when Kano and Funakoshi, they were friends at the university in Tokyo, right? And Kano was developing judo, and Funakoshi was developing his style of karate, and he and Kano had a kind of gentleman's agreement that Kano was going to take away the strikes in judo from jiu-jitsu, and Funakoshi would take away the throws and stuff from karate. So they also, judo and karate had the same connection, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
But they both had strikes. Like in judo had strikes and karate had throws, but highlight it out of respect for each other and to help the other art forward.
Which was both a good and a bad thing, because it really streamlined these two styles. But at the same time, there was a loss for respective people, depending on what their goal is. Like in judo, if your goal is to play judo as a sport and not for self-defense purposes, then, I mean, narrowing down the techniques is better, because then you can hone those specific skills. But if it's for other purposes, it's a loss. I'm always regretting lost technique. Maybe it's my artistic, romantic side. You know, when I hear about a library that burned down, I get very sad about
Terrible.
it. That lost information, lost technique, it's something I lament.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how is your modeling and art drawing side of life going?
All around me are drawings. This one, I think this is the last one I completed.
Yeah, I've seen the birds. They are really, you really have a good hand with that.
Thank you. I actually, my first degree was in graphic design.
Okay.
And I very early on realized that I shouldn't have studied graphic design. I should have studied fine arts. I didn't enjoy graphic design. I enjoyed the design part, but graphic design is very restrictive to what the client wants, and it's about business, marketing, and manipulation. So actually, the degree I did was business communication with graphic design. So it was all about manipulating people to buy a product, and something inside of me just didn't like that idea of manipulating minds. So yeah. So, and then I started studying other things, and I started to neglect the artistic side of me. And it was maybe in 2015, I was in China visiting, I think it was Shanghai at the time, and I was at one of the famous national museums and looking at all of these beautiful artworks, and something inside of me just said, I'm dying. Like, a part of me is dying, and it was that artistic side. So I decided to start once a week, just start drawing. And at the time, I just called it doodling. Like, I didn't want to call my work artistic works or something, because I wasn't good anymore. I have lost so much of my skill. So I started with this weekly half an hour or hour long drawing session. And I started with fish, actually. And I got bored of the fish, and I switched over to birds. And I just stuck with the birds for some reason. And part of it is it takes away the thinking. Like, the idea of making this grand artistic work was too heavy. It kind of numbed me. I couldn't do it. So I decided I'll just draw birds or paint birds. And I got better. I regained so much of my skill. And it's a very interesting lesson, because it would just be about 30 minutes to an hour once a week over a few years. And you can acquire so much skill by doing something for 30 minutes to an hour once a week. And now when I look at my early drawings compared to the ones I do now, and I still complete them in about the same time. Like, one drawing will take me 1 or 2 hours to finish. So with the same amount of time I put into it, but just having regained skill over 3 years, 4 years, I can see a gigantic different. I have so many drawings here, but I put many of them away. So maybe use this one. This one is a little bit an older painting. So maybe it's about 2 years old. And if we compare it to, say, this one, which I did last year, so you can see a dramatic difference in technical quality.
Do you look at the picture of a bird when you draw it, or is it from on freehand or?
No, I do use some reference photos.
Yeah.
So I find nice photos on Instagram or online, and then I don't try to keep with the photo very closely. The interesting thing about watercolor and the kind of pencil work I do is birds are often very smooth. Their feathers are very smooth. So when you do it exactly like the photo, it looks very flat.
Yeah.
So I have to give it some texture to give it a more three-dimensional quality. So at first I tried to keep close to it, but then one of my artistic friends told me, your pictures look so two-dimensional. And I was very offended. And then I decided, okay, I need to make them look more three-dimensional. And the way to do it is to actually deviate from the original to make it more, yeah. So that's the art. I hope to have a small exhibit of my birds maybe this year. We'll see.
Cool. You know, we have 2 minutes left.
Say again?
We have 2 minutes left.
Okay. Quick about the modeling. I never expected to become a model, especially at my age. I started 4 years ago. I'm 42 now, so I was 38 when I started. It was not something I thought about. It happened quite accidentally.
Really cool.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah. It's a very strange thing. I didn't consider myself good looking before. But sometimes I look at these photos and they look really good. Say again? And it's a good thing when you get all these free photos, you know, when you do all these modeling. People spend hours with selfies. I have thousands of photos now from all these different modeling gigs. I do maybe twice a month modeling.
Cool.
Yeah.
You know, Sanko, it's been a pleasure. I hope we can speak soon in not too long. I hope I get a chance to get back to Korea and visit you again. And if you are in Europe, please give me and we might hook up on someplace.
Yeah, I was planning to come to Europe this July for a martial arts conference, but COVID-19